Hi guys and welcome back to the Mighty Blues. My name is of course Cameron and welcome back today to another video. We haven't done one of these in a while. This is another latest Everton news and rumours live stream. It's a type of stream where we sit down and we go through the latest Everton news and rumours over the last couple of days or so, and we basically just give my 10 pence worth on what is going on around the football club at the moment. We are bang into July now, the 8th of July, over a week into the January, not July, what am I talking about? Bang into January now, the 8th of January, a week into the January transfer window, and that of course means we have got transfer rumours to discuss. I use the phrase silly season every single time we enter a transfer market, and that is because typically over the course of a transfer market, be it January or the summer, Everton are usually linked with about 428,000 players, of which we maybe sign 4 or 5 of them max, and that is a good summer as well. Obviously, we've already been told by Sean Dyche and Kevin Thelwell that it is likely to be a quiet transfer window this winter due to obviously financial constraints, which we all knew about, and the lack of funds available for transfers. I do think Everton will be looking to strengthen, because I think we'd be silly not to be looking to strengthen, whilst I understand the financial situation at the moment, and I understand we mightn't have 20, 30, 40 million pounds to go and spend. There's definitely players that could become available, be it on a loan deal or a cheap move for us to be able to go and pursue, that would be able to come in, strengthen the squad and give us a little bit more strength and depth for the last few months of the season. Because one thing that become evidently clear over the course of the last 5 or 6 weeks or so is that this team just simply hasn't got the strength and depth to be able to compete consistently. We know that we've got quality, we know that we've got players that'll work hard, that will give 110%, but ultimately if you've got, 1 or 2 players playing every single week for 7-8 games on the spin over the course of a month, then you're going to see tiredness, you're going to see fatigue, and you're going to see performance levels drop. What we need is to bring in a couple of more names to strengthen that squad and to give us a different option off the bench as well, and hopefully we can make that happen this window. I'm not particularly holding my breath, and I haven't got particularly high hopes, because we've been told by both the manager and the director of football basically don't have high hopes, which I think is a good thing, because it sets the expectation immediately. Typically when we go into transfer windows, you always hear the manager or the director of football or whoever it may be associated with the football club come out and say things like, we want to strengthen, we're looking to strengthen, we're always looking to improve the squad, etc., etc. And it almost sets a precedent and an expectation amongst the fan base that, the club were going to go out and buy 4 or 5 real top quality players to come in and improve the squad. And then, as we saw in the summer, when our first signing is a few weeks after the window is opened and it ends up being Ashley Young, you start to get the murmurs of, well, where does he fit in? How does he improve? When are we going to actually bring somebody in a position that we need to strengthen in hugely? And the expectation is almost unmeetable then for the football club, and certainly for a football club in the financial position and situation that Everton are in. So the fact that both the manager and director of football have effectively come out and said don't expect much is, as I said, it's frustrating, but it's not surprising. We all knew the position that Everton were in. We all know the situation that Everton are in. And, ultimately, they're only telling us what we already knew. What it means is that anybody we do bring in, I think we start to look at more of a positive as opposed to a negative. And that can be really important with a signing sometimes. Sometimes you can bring a player in and there's already a sort of a preconception of what we should think about that player and how we should feel about that player coming into the football club based upon the expectation that we had. So, we all expected Everton to go out and strengthen in the summer and bring a number of quality forward names in to, ultimately improve the squad, namely a striker. And then when we brought Ashley Young in, a couple of weeks into it, we all sort of sat in and thought, well, why are we bringing a 38-year-old left-back in that we don't need? The reality is, he's actually a good member of the squad, experienced, adds an awful lot to the squad. There's been relatively up and down this season, in my opinion, but has certainly had moments where his experience has been needed, and that expectation came from the fact that we all went into the summer thinking, oh, what business are we going to do? And we were told, oh, we're always looking to strengthen and we want striking options, etc., etc. Whereas this window, I think anybody Everton managed to get through the door will be viewed at in more of a natural positive light because we've not really expected anything. Having said that, we're going to talk about a certain player potentially moving out of the door this month, as well as a player moving into the door as well. Let's get straight into it then, without further ado. Latest rumours today are, according to transfers.com, Manchester United have initiated talks with Everton midfielder Amadou Onana. Erik ten Hag wanted Onana in the summer. Everton have long-standing interest in Scott McTominay. The Scottish midfielder is a major target for Sean Dyche. Also, according to Sasha Tavalieri, intensive talks currently ongoing between Everton and Arsenal for Amadou Onana. The Belgium is keen on the move. Now, whilst they are not two of the most reliable sources in the world, the latter source, Sasha Tavalieri, is actually quite prominent with Belgium news. He was the first reporter, I believe, to break the original story that Amadou Onana would be signing for Everton, when a lot of the worldwide media, and certainly a lot of media in Belgium, believed he was going to sign for West Ham, and that deal was sorted and there was not going to be any problems there. Sasha was one of the first journalists to come out and say, no, hang on, Everton are interested here and this could swing, and obviously ultimately it did swing. And I seem to remember, and this is just going off the top of my head and my memory, which isn't great, but I seem to remember pretty much everything he reported during that time about Amadou Onana's move to Everton was pretty much solid and ended up, being true. So as soon as I seen this rumour today, I did perk my ears a little bit and pay a little bit more attention to it. As I said, we are in that period of silly season, and for me, what that means, and the reason I use that word, is because quite often we see Everton linked with numerous different players across a transfer window, or we see numerous different clubs linked with Everton players, and there's never really anything in them other than just a nonsense rumour that somebody has made up to create a few clickbait headlines and get people reading certain articles, etc., etc. So there's a lot of stuff that we will read over the course of the next few weeks, and that I've read over the course of the last couple of weeks, and I've sort of just gone, yeah, absolutely nonsense. That's never happened. The typical stuff. Everton interested in Michy Batshuayi for the 780th transfer window on the spin. But this one did perk my ears a little bit for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because, as I said, Sasha is not the most reliable source in the world. We're not talking, The Athletic or Fabrizio Romano here, but he is definitely somebody that, when it comes to Belgian players, has clearly got inside information and inside knowledge into what's going on. And also, because I just have this gut feeling that Amadou Onana is going to leave Everton in this transfer window. And that's not me saying I want him to leave Everton in this transfer window. That's not me saying I hope we sell him in this transfer window. I've just got this gut feeling that he's going to move on. And I don't know why that is. That might be because there seems to be, at the moment, there's certainly a selection of Evertonians. I'm not going to say all, I'm not going to say few, I'm not going to say many, but I'm seeing a considerable amount of Evertonians on social media who would be willing to sell Amadou Onana with no problem at all. I think the penalty situation at Fulham has really stuck in the throat of a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who seemingly now are unwilling to see Amadou Onana as anything other than just sort of a selfish footballer that will move on anyway, so why not sell him now? I don't quite agree with that. Yes, the penalty against Fulham was absolutely shocking and it was a horrendous mistake, and he knows that, but I think for the most part this season, Amadou Onana has been incredibly consistent. I think he's more often than not put in solid performances. He was the best player on the pitch when we played Crystal Palace on Thursday, and although that wasn't a particularly exciting game and there wasn't a particular amount of sort of action in it to be able to say, oh, he was absolutely excellent. I know people will say, well, everybody else was terrible, Cam. So, but for me, again, I do think he's getting a little bit of unwarranted stick at the moment. I think he's been much better than some people are giving him credit for. Is he the finished article? Absolutely not. Has he got room to improve? Of course he has. Is he as consistent as we would like him to be? No, he isn't. But he also offers something on the pitch that nobody else does, with his size, with his speed, with his his just the reach that his body can reach. He can make slide challenges that no other player would be able to make without giving up a foul. And he has got the ability to dominate and boss a midfield battle, and therefore dominate and boss a game of football. Now, does he do it as often enough as we would like him to? No. But he's a 22-year-old who's only playing his second season in the English Premier League. And let me just remind you that prior to joining Everton Football Club last summer, Amadou Onana had only made 60-odd senior appearances as a professional footballer. Now, that isn't an awful lot of appearances whatsoever. That's 2 seasons, effectively, as a professional footballer. And he's moving to not only the most difficult league in the world and the most watched league in the world, but also he's moving to a side within that league that is battling relegation and battling to stay in the division and going through hardships pretty much week in, week out. So I don't think it should be overlooked just because of his talent, that the reason he's not consistent is because he's not arsed. I think it's a very difficult circumstance Amadou Onana is in, and he's obviously an incredibly talented footballer, but he's an incredibly talented footballer with a lot to learn and a lot of time to grow. It's not like we're talking about a 26, 27-year-old here and we're sort of thinking, well, he's not really where he should be, and he's at an age now where he should be there. He's 22 years old. He could have another 2 seasons of not quite being there, and yet still could come into his prime at 25 and be absolutely unbelievable. Now, I'm not saying that I think he will be at Everton in 2-3 seasons' time when he's at that prime level, but for me, it would be a huge, huge risk for Everton to allow Amadou Onana to leave in January, in my opinion. It would be a huge risk, and a risk that some people may say we need to take for financial reasons. I don't think Onana is as... I don't think there's this desperate need to get him out the football club. And I'm not saying that anybody is suggesting that, by the way, but like with Anthony Gordon last January, when there was almost a desperate need for him to leave the football club, he had to leave for his benefit, for our benefit, for everybody's benefit. Anthony Gordon needed to be moved on. He'd had a toxic relationship with the Evertonians. He'd said a couple of things in interviews which just didn't land well. Whilst we got a pretty lucrative price for who at the time was, for me, an average footballer, he's since gone on and done well at Newcastle, fair play to him, but whilst we got a lucrative fee for him at that time, there was absolutely no way he was going to be able to stay at Everton after, everything had happened, sort of between him and the fan base. That relationship had really severed, and there was no way it was going to be fixed. So he almost had to leave the football club at that time. We got a good deal for him. He wanted to leave, and we all moved on. I don't think it's quite the same with Amadou. I'll be honest, I don't think he's quite at that level, whilst I think he's an incredibly frustrating player at times. And I think there is a section of the fan base that believes he should be sold based upon the fact that he's incredibly frustrating and he's inconsistent. I don't think we're at the point where he absolutely needs to be sold, because that relationship between him and the fans is too far gone. I don't think we're there yet. Now, whilst I understand 70 million pounds would be an unbelievable amount of money for Everton Football Club, and it would, and if somebody is willing to bid 70 million pounds for Amadou Onana in January, then maybe we start to have a little bit of a different conversation. The reality of the situation is, and I will say this once because this is fact. It's not an opinion. It's not a matter of, well, maybe, or what if, or this could happen. This is fact. If Everton sell Amadou Onana this window, be it for 20 million quid, which it won't be obviously, or 250 million quid, the important thing is if we do not replace him, then we almost certainly will be relegated this season, because that midfield is already incredibly weak and has already got a lot of pressure on it, given the fact that the minute one of Gomez, Garner, or Onana picks up, or Decore picks up an injury, we're struggling. With Decore's been out now for a couple of games, and we haven't won since. Last season, when Decore was suspended, we didn't win a single game. the importance of one player. Onana comes out, all of a sudden you're relying on Garner Gay. Garner Gay is at an age now where he can't play every single week in, week out. If he picks up an injury, then what? We're relying on Andre Gomez, who, let's be quite honest with ourselves, should have been moved out the football club a long time ago. It would be a ridiculously huge risk that I think this football club would be silly to take, especially given that Amadou Onana is the type of player whose his fee for me is only going to get higher. He's at an age and he's at a level now where I don't think it's a case of, well, we've got to take the money now or we might never get that money again. We mightn't. Of course we mightn't, because that's always a risk in football. He might go to the World Cup, pick up an injury, be out for the season and then never come back the same player, and we may have rejected the £60 million bid in January. But the likelihood is he's going to increase his transfer fee for at least the next couple of years. And I think if Everton rejected £60 million in January, I don't think they'd fear that they wouldn't receive that similar sort of bid in the summer, especially if he goes away for the Euros and has a good tournament with Belgium. That will only add more to his transfer fee. Like I said, the repercussion of selling a player like Amadou Onana and not replacing him in the middle of a season when you've already got squad depth issues and you're already struggling to fill areas within that midfield would be, it just would be baffling for me. Absolutely baffling. And I understand people saying, well, sell him then and then go and buy a replacement in January. That's much easier said than done, isn't it? Let's be honest. One of these reports here states that Everton are interested in Scott McTominay, and the manager, Sean Dyche, has had a long-standing interest with the player. Just because Manchester United are interested in Amadou Onana, by the way, doesn't mean Manchester United are interested in selling Scott McTominay. And there seems to be this happens all the time on social media whenever Everton are linked with players or players are linked with moves to away from Everton, etc, etc. You see tweets like, great, sell Onana for 70 million, go and buy McTominay for 25 and then use the other 40 odd million to go and buy a winger. Yeah, ideal world, brilliant, yeah. I can tell you now, Manchester United aren't selling Scott McTominay for under £50 million to Everton in the middle of a season, even if they bring in Amadou Onana. Because they're a business themselves that are in huge amounts of debts, and they're not going to let a player that ultimately plays, between 20 and 30 times a season for them in various different competitions to leave the football club for next to nothing. They're not. I'd really like Scott McTominay at Everton, I would, but I don't think he's the same player as Amadou Onana. I think Scott McTominay is more of a Abdoulaye Doucouré type of player, and we definitely need the replacement for Abdoulaye Doucouré, because as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, when Dukes gets injured, we're absolutely bollocks. So I'm not saying that I wouldn't have Scott McTominay, but I wouldn't have him to replace Onana, because I don't think he is the same type of player as Onana. Plus, we live in a world where that just doesn't happen in football anymore. You don't get it. Well, we'll give you this player and you give us this player. It doesn't happen. Everton would have to sell Onana to Manchester United, and then Manchester United would have to sell Scott McTominay to Everton. But it would be much, much more than the figure that seems to be floating around social media at the moment. That is like, they just give us him for practically nothing. It wouldn't be like that. It wouldn't be like that at all. And then we'd leave ourselves with still an Amadou Onana shaped hole to fill in the midfield, and not an awful lot of money to be able to fill that hole if we were to go out and buy Scott McTominay as well. Now, again, I get it. Everton are a club in a position at the moment that if we're wanting to buy, we're going to have to sell. That's fine. I understand that. And I'm not saying that selling Amadou Onana in the summer would be the worst thing in the world. I'm not saying that we should do everything we can to keep him forever and ever and ever. The reality is, if we get a strong bid, and I class a strong bid for me as 70 million plus, because Romeo Lavia went to Chelsea for 60 odd million pounds in the summer, and I don't even think he's touched the ball. Granted, he's been injured, but I don't even think he's touched the ball. Caicedo went for over 100 million pounds, and there's a debate as to who's better, Caicedo or Onana. I'm not saying Onana is, but there's definitely a debate. So if he's going for 100 million pounds, then Onana should be going for somewhat similar. However, it's all well and good having 70 million quid in the bank, but if you can't spend it because it's too late in the window, for example, and teams aren't willing to sell, their better players, or you can't spend it because, we say we get £70 million for Onana this summer, and we go, right, okay, who do we want to replace him with? And a couple of names are brought up, and we go to, again, let's say Man United for Scott McTominay, and they go, well, we want 50 million for him because he's a key squad player, he's involved an awful lot, he's been here a while, and it's January, so we don't really want to sell him for, a cut price. You might get him for a cut price in the summer, because we can reevaluate the squad. There's longer to bring players in. You got a full pre-season. But January, middle of the season, you are always paying a premium on any player you bring in January. Always. Because effectively you are leaving whichever team you're buying from with a problem. You're leaving them with a problem to have to go and replace. If you go to anybody, any club in the world, in the middle of the season and you say, I want to buy your best player, they're going to charge you more than what they would in the summer because they've got to replace that player in the middle of a season with only 2 or 3 weeks to do it, as opposed to at the beginning of a season with 5, 6, 7 weeks and a full pre-season to do it. So, I think selling any massively important player in a team that is already going to be struggling this season, like Everton are, and I don't think Everton will be relegated. I think Everton will be clear of relegation by March, April, hopefully, because of the fact that I think we've got a much stronger team and a much stronger squad, and I think we've got a much better manager than the teams that are in and around that area. And obviously, had we have not had the points deduction, we wouldn't be anywhere near it now. However, if we start to sell our key players and not replace them, then we will be in that fight. And that is just something that we can't afford. We can't afford for that to happen. As much as we may need the money and as much as the money would be great, I'm fairly confident in saying the money will be there in the summer. Fairly confident. And if we're to sell in January, for me, it would have to be an astronomical amount of money, and there would have to be a number one target that is pretty much guaranteed to come in to replace Onana. And it would have to be a player of a similar ilk to Onana, and I don't think Scott McTominay is that. I think Scott McTominay is a very good player, and I think Scott McTominay would improve us hugely, and he's definitely somebody I'd be excited to see at Everton, but I don't think he's a replacement for Amadou Onana. He doesn't play in the same position. He's not the same type of player as Amadou Onana. He doesn't break the game up like Amadou Onana does. I'm not saying Amadou's been perfect, by the way, but he's been a lot better than what a lot of people are giving him credit for. As I said, he was man of the match in that Palace game, and that was a boring, dry game where not a lot happened and not a lot was going on, and there was not a lot to talk about, but regardless, he was still the best player on the pitch. So, yeah, the other sort of axle to this story, I suppose, or to this situation is, well, what if Amadou Onana kicks up a fuss and wants to go and thinks this might be his only time to get a move to somebody like Arsenal or Manchester United, etc., etc., etc. If we're in that position, then we're in that position, and that's something we've got to deal with at the time. We can't plan for Amadou to turn around one day and say, actually, do you know what? I want to leave the football club. I think the manager's probably had conversations with him, or certainly should have had conversations with him, as to see where his head's at. Because ultimately, you don't want to be left, in the last week of the window and then him turn around and say, oh yeah, I actually really do want to leave. But then again, he's a footballer contracted to the football club, and, his midfield partner at one time tried to do the same in Idrissa Gana Gueye before he went to PSG, tried to make the move happen in January. We said, no, you're too important, we need you, keep your head down, work hard, and you'll get the move in the summer. And he did. He kept his head down, he worked hard, and he got his move in the summer, and everybody was happy. That conversation, I think, would have to happen with Amadou. I think it would have to be a case of, right, this is the date. We want, for me, 80 million quid plus. And I know people go, oh, he's not worth that, he's terrible, how could you want 80 million pound for him? Just go and look at some of the transfers that have happened over the last 12 to 18 months in the Premier League, and some of the players that have moved for serious money. Yeah. For me, I'd be saying 80 million quid, and you've got till the 15th. And if that bid isn't presented by the 15th of January, he ain't going anywhere. And if Amadou Onana then kicks up a fuss and says he wants to leave and he wants to move beyond that point, I'd say, well, you wait until the summer and you get your head down and you play for the football club that pays your wage. And then if you play well enough, you'll get an even better move in the summer than what you would have got in January. Because We can't afford to be allowing these situations to run until the last week of the window. The last thing we need is 4 or 5 days to go, and Everton have sold Onana for 80 million, and we've got 80 million quid with very little time to spend it. We need to spend it because we need to bring in a replacement, and anybody that we're going to bring in, the teams are going to go, well, you're desperate now and you've only got 4 days, so we want an extra 20 million quid on this player that isn't worth it. So, yeah, Everton have got to be very strategic. Who knows? Maybe Amadou Onana wants to stay at the football club. Maybe he doesn't even want to leave Everton. Maybe he wants to finish the season and then move on in the summer. We don't know that, but I would be, if I was in control of this situation and I was Kevin Thelwell in this situation, I would be very, very, very reluctant to allow Amadou Onana to leave in this transfer window, because I just think the risks far outweigh the rewards. And I know £80 million would be absolutely lovely, but it's no good if you can't spend it. And if Everton go down because we haven't got the strength and depth in the midfield to stay up and compete, then, you know, that £80 million is going to have to go towards replacing Jordan Pickford and Jared Brandtwaite and various other players that will leave if Everton are relegated. So, yeah, for me, I would hold out on this one. As much as I know people don't love Onana, as much as I think people believe he's overrated or he's not as good as maybe others think he is, and he's not worth that money, so we should sell him. We do have to think about the situation here. You know, is Jordan Pickford? No, let's use another example. Is Jared Brandtwaite, who's also been linked with a move away today to Real Madrid, ironically, is Jared Brandtwaite a £200 million defender? He's not far off it, but probably not at the moment. However, if Everton received a bid on the 31st of January with 3 hours to go in the transfer window for £200 million for Jared Brandtwaite, I would be disgusted if Everton accepted it and allowed him to leave. Because we would in no way, shape or form have any time to replace him, and finishing a season with Michael Keane starting week in, week out is, I don't think my stress levels can handle that. And that's no disrespect to Michael Keane. I'm just using him as an example of the player that would step in who has proven he's not good enough to play week in, week out. So it's not just the case of, well, look at the money when you're in a position that Everton are in. We are in a position where selling one player and not replacing them, whether it be Onana, whether it be Pickford, whether it be Brandtwaite, we're in a position where that could be the difference between staying up and being relegated. Now, if we were Arsenal, then yeah, sound. Take the money, take the 200 million, have a bit of a struggle. You'll probably still finish in the top 8 or 9, and then go and spend that money in the summer. Boss, we're not. We're in a position where losing one of our key players and better performers and not replacing them could be the difference in Everton staying in this division and being relegated. And being relegated with our financial problems could cause a hell of a lot more issues to this football club that we all love. So that risk, for me, far outweighs the reward of, well, we've got 80 million quid in the bank here and we'll be able to spend that in the summer. Because, yeah, I'm just not comfortable with that. As I said, for me, if I'm Sean Dyche, the first thing I'm doing is sitting down with him and saying, there's been a couple of reports on the internet suggesting that your representatives are in talks with certain clubs or this, that and the other. What's your feeling? Do you want to leave the club? If he says yes, then you say to him, well, just so you know, clubs have got until the 15th of the month to put a bid in. Otherwise, you're not going nowhere because we can't find a suitable replacement in enough time. If he says no, then it's not even a conversation. It's not even a conversation. So, yeah, again, for me, I'd be a little bit hesitant on this one. I would. And obviously, you know, we may sell him for 80 million quid and we might go out and buy somebody for 25 that nobody's ever really heard of, and they might come in and be excellent and we might all be sitting here going, oh, what a deal that is, what a great move that is. But that is a very, very unlikely circumstance. The very likely circumstance is we don't replace him, we overplay the players that are already here, players pick up more injuries, we struggle to fill a slot, and we ultimately struggle week in, week out. So, yeah, yeah. As I said, this one didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise me at all. Whether or not it's just journalism stuff, whether or not it's just his agent, trying to create a story and trying to create a bit of hype to create some interest for him for the summer, so that, by the time we get into the summer, he's already got a list of clubs that are lining up to bring him in. Who knows what it is? Who knows? As I said, we are in silly season, and you don't really know what's true and what isn't true until it's happening, and by the time it's happening, it's too late. So, yeah, let's just wait and see how this one progresses. From an Everton player potentially leaving to Manchester United, to a Manchester United player potentially joining Everton, according to Fabrizio Romano on Friday night. Everton are attempting to hijack Seville's loan for Manchester United's Hannibal Mejbri. It was also reported by Will Unwin and The Guardian that Manchester United's Hannibal Mejbri is set to join Everton or Seville this month, though it seems like there is a decision to be made for young Hannibal Mejbri of Manchester United. For those that don't know an awful lot about him, he's 20 years of age, attacking midfielder, Tunisian player, of course. He has played 5 times in the Premier League this season, scored 1 goal and got 1 yellow card. His starting 11 minutes were 5%, so his 5 appearances have all been off the bench. I believe all competitions this season, 10 games and 1 goal. He's played twice in the Champions League, twice in the EFL Cup, and twice for Manchester United's under-23 team in the Premier League too. Very, very highly rated young player. A player that is definitely got a huge, huge future ahead of him. Be interesting to see if he is playing for Manchester United tonight when they face Wigan in the FA Cup. I'll be keeping an eye out for that one. But yeah, definitely somebody that I think is more the realistic aim. I've seen a few rumours over the last week or so about Everton being interested in certain player for 40 million, certain player for 30 million, certain player for 20 million. Michy Batshuayi's name popped up again. But this is definitely the more realistic move for me. A young player on loan from a fellow Premier League club where he isn't going to get much game time. Man United are probably looking at it and go, well, would rather him go to Everton because him going to Seville, how much is he going to learn? Even if he's playing week in, week out in La Liga, it's not really going to do much for bringing him back to Man United. It would do good for putting his price tag up. And, they'd probably be able to sell him a lot quicker if he went and played and done well at Seville. But it definitely wouldn't do much for them wanting to bring him back in and integrate him back into the Manchester United side, whereas going to Everton, he's still in the same area of the country, so he doesn't have to move. He won't be unsettled. He'll still be near his home in terms of in Manchester, with his family, etc., etc., etc. And he'll be playing relatively week in, week out in the Premier League. I like this deal, to be honest. I like this deal. I think he's a good player. I think he's somebody that shows an immense amount of potential. Look, I don't know a huge amount about him. I'm not going to sit here and claim that, he's this, that, and the other, and he's going to be excellent, and he'd be the best player we ever signed. But what he is the right profile of player. He's young, he's hungry, he'd be coming in on loan, so financially it wouldn't be too big of a burden. We'll probably have to cover half of his wage or a quarter of his wage, whatever, which probably wouldn't be that much anyway. He, as I said, he'll be coming in with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, with a bit of a point to prove, and he'll be wanting to get his head down and work. And ultimately, he would be a very, very welcome addition to a squad that is desperately in need of attacking creative players in the midfield. As we've spoken about numerous times over the last couple of weeks and a couple of times already today, look at the impact that not having Abdoulaye Doucouré available has done to this squad. We are so much worse when he's not available. We can't score goals. We don't create much. We're not great in the final third when Dukes isn't there. Having someone who is able to step in and maybe help that out a little bit and provide that little bit of cover and provide that youthfulness and that talent and that sort of rawness of what Hannibal would bring, because he's 20 years old. As I said, he's a raw, talented footballer. He's not the best player in the world. It's not like we're uncovering a gem here, but with Everton's financial situation this window, unless we do sell somebody big like an Onana or a Pickford or a Branthwaite, which obviously is something that none of us want. Maybe some people wouldn't mind Onana moving on, but certainly the other two, we're wanting to stay at the football club, and personally for me, I want all three to stay. This is the market that we're going to have to deal in. the loanee market is where I think Everton will do business this January. I can't see Everton going out and spending money on a player. I just can't, unless obviously we move somebody out the football club, not necessarily somebody big, but unless we can get rid of some of the fringe players and bring some money in from that, I can't really see us, going out and spending much. So the loan market is where we seem to be operating, and this deal for me makes a lot of sense. Now, whether or not Hannibal himself would prefer to play for Everton over Seville is another question. Yes, obviously Everton are closer to home, and yes, Everton are in the Premier League, but he might look at Seville and think, well, it's a European opportunity. It's an opportunity to go and play in a different country, learn me trade a little bit. There's numerous players, young players, that have gone and played in different countries, and they've improved massively from that. Pardon me, in recent years. So I'm not holding me hat on this one. I'm not sort of looking and thinking, yeah, this will definitely go ahead, because Seville ultimately are an attractive club, and that way of living and way of life over there in Spain is also very attractive. So again, we'll wait and see how this one progresses. According to The Guardian of Fabrizio Romano, it's a straight decision to be made by Manchester United and by Hannibal himself as to whether or not he goes to Seville or Everton. Everton apparently stepped in late to try and hijack the move. Again, gut feeling says he'll go to Seville, because I'm an Evertonian, and that tends to be how these things work. But he's somebody that I would definitely welcome at the football club. Again, not somebody that's going to come in and rip it up week in, week out and be absolutely unbelievable, but he's got talent, he's brave, as the Blues says, he's willing to put a foot in, and he's somebody that can provide that energy and that intensity when maybe we're struggling. A little bit like the game against Wolves, a little bit like the game against Palace. He'd be a great example of somebody that could come on, provide that bit of energy, and maybe lift the levels of everybody else by a couple of percent, and that can be the difference between you winning games and not winning games. So yeah, whether or not this one goes ahead, we'll have to wait and see, but it's definitely an interesting rumour, isn't it? And it's the most believable one I've seen all window, to be honest with you. Everton being linked with a young up-and-coming talent from one of the top clubs in the league on loan is very believable, given the situation that we're in. And yeah, whether or not it happens, we'll wait and see. But he's definitely a talented kid who would come in and I think would be well received by Evertonians, well received. Do we need more than that? Yes, we do need more than that, and I'm not sitting here saying get Hannibal in and then everything will be okay. But as I said, financial issues, various different things. Let's not forget we're in the middle of a takeover process as well, which we're going to move on to talk about in a second. Yeah, there's no guarantee that we'll be able to go out and bring exactly what we need in. We'll just have to wait and see what happens, and if Hannibal is a name that the club can go and get, and they believe that he can provide something, then why shouldn't we go and get him? Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about that takeover, because it has gone quiet over the last few weeks or so, and it's led me to sort of believe, well, what's going on with it? And we have had a bit of an update over the last 24 hours or so. Alan Myers reporting last night that approval from the Premier League of 777 partners takeover of Everton could come any day now. We then heard today from David Ornstein that 777 has loaned Everton a further €50 million for working capital and stadium costs. Prospective new Everton owners now up to just north of $180 million. Dollars, $50 million, $180 million in lending to the club as Premier League approval process continues. We also had a bit of an update from bear with me 2 seconds, from the BBC regarding the situation, stating that there is just that Premier League process that is awaiting now. Shamoon Hafiz of the BBC reporting Everton still awaiting news of 777 partners takeover. Key Premier League checks on source of 777's funding and proof of funding for 3 years of business plan. Same team assessing 777 takeover that assessed Radcliffe's 25% stake at Manchester United. And he then further said in the comments that the FA have already approved, the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, have already approved, and it is now just a case of waiting for the Premier League to approve. So, yeah, obviously Everton have had their fair share of issues with the Premier League over the course of the last few months or so, whatever the outcome of that approval process is from the Premier League, I don't think either outcomes would be particularly surprising, whether or not they approved or whether or not they didn't approve. As I said, I don't think anything would surprise Evertonians at the moment from the Premier League, because they've been an absolute shambles over the last couple of months. But it does seem like this is creeping closer and closer. And whilst this creeps closer and closer, we're also getting more and more rumours about other clubs that 777 own, and the fact that those certain other clubs aren't doing particularly well, or are potentially facing a points deduction, potentially facing a fine, etc, etc, etc. Whilst reports that Everton are getting another loan, from the same company who own clubs that are due to be fined for not paying certain. So yeah, it's all a little bit all over the place at the moment. Again, it looks very, very likely now that 777 will be the new owners. A lot of people were holding their hat on the fact that they wouldn't pass the process. Well, they've passed 2 of the 3 in the FA and the FCA. It's now just the Premier League, and as the Premier League have shown over the last couple of months, they're not really the best run corporation in the world, and they're not really a corporation that particularly knows what they're talking about. So yeah, I expect this to be approved over the course of the next couple of weeks or so, maybe even before that, and then at least we'll have some clarity. Do I think 777 will be the ideal owners for Everton? My gut feeling says no. Do I think they'll be as bad as what Farhad Moshiri has been? Again, there's a lot of people who are sort of insisting that 777 will be much worse than Farhad Moshiri. For me, I can't really think of... I just can't really think of a world in which it gets worse than what it has been for the last few years. Yes, I know Farhad Moshiri has come in and built Everton Stadium, and that's ultimately what his legacy will be. But on the pitch, there's absolutely no question we've decreased hugely since he's come into the football club. The financial situation of the football club has been a disaster. The way the football club is being ran by the people that it's being ran by has been a disaster. The on-the-field stuff has been an absolute disaster. The commercial stuff has been a disaster. The whole club, from top to bottom, on and off the pitch, barring that stadium, has been an absolute disaster from the moment that fella walked in the door. So yes, I understand and appreciate the concerns with 777, and I get it completely, and I share those same concerns. I also think, well, do you know what? It's a fresh start. It's going to happen, isn't it? Seemingly. It's not like we can get away from it. It's not like we can get out of it. It seems like that's going to happen. So let's ultimately just wait and see. And if I'm being honest, I think 777 will probably look to sell the football club when the stadium's built anyway, because they'll have a football club worth much, much more than what they bought it for. So, yeah. The Blues makes a good point, says Moshiri's intentions were at least good despite his idiocy, but we don't know about the intentions. We don't. And as I said, there's every chance they could come in and they could be as disastrous as what people fear they will be, and they could not provide us with any money, and they could, absolutely drown the football club, etc, etc, etc. Or they could come in and they could be relatively solid, just keep us afloat, keep us sort of ticking over, keep us and try and make us into a sustainable football club that can keep itself running without the need for loans or payments from other people, and see us through into that new stadium. And then they may look to sell to somebody with even deeper pockets. Who knows what's going to happen, but it seems like we are only a matter of days away from that announcement being made, and we'll obviously we'll have the breaking latest news when it does happen. So don't forget to subscribe. We are aiming towards 9,000 subscribers now. We've just hit 1,000 followers on TikTok. Big thank you all. If you haven't followed us on TikTok, please go and do so. The Mighty Blues EFC would mean a huge amount to me. But yeah, like I said, let's just wait and see what happens on this one. But it seems like it's getting closer and closer. And one positive, I suppose I would say, when about this is, at least when this is confirmed and they do officially take over from Farhad Moshiri, at least we'll have owners. Everton have gone through a lot in the last couple of months or so, and we've not really had anybody there to stick up for us other than management, as in the manager or the players, or Colin Chong has obviously come out and done a few statements on a few various different things, the points deduction, etc. We've not really had anybody with with the ability to come out and stand up for us and say that no, this is my club, I'm the owner, or I'm the CEO. It's all just felt very up the wall at the moment. The CEO that's in place is a temporary one and is just saying the very basic things. The owner hasn't been heard of for however many months. So at least when the new owners come in, we'll actually have a bit of structure and a bit of stability, and we'll know who's running the football club, and we'll know who owns the football club, and we'll know what people's roles are, and it means we'll be much better positioned when having to deal with things like points deductions. But yeah, that is the latest on that. And then a couple of other reports and rumours regarding players. The Mail reporting Real Madrid have an interest in Jared Branthwaite, and he is on their radar for the summer transfer window. As I said, big money, otherwise he ain't going anywhere. And they also reported Italian side Atalanta have an interest in defender Ben Godfrey, but have been put off a deal due to the overall costs. Yeah, again, I feel like Everton will be in that position with a couple of players, Ben Godfrey, Michael Keane, Mason Holgate when he returns from his loan at Southampton. I feel like there's a number of players that Everton will struggle to get off the wages, to get off the books that they typically would really like to get off the books. But yeah, Sean says, have we got a chairman? No. We've got an interim CEO and a couple of other interim board members. Let's not forget, Farhad Moshiri is an Everton board member at the moment, which is just laughable and tells you everything you need to know, because he may have nothing to do with the football club within the next couple of weeks, and yet he's a board member. So, yeah, it's very much a mess at the moment. And as I said, whatever you think of 777 and whether you're worried about them and whether you're a bit concerned, at the very least, we'll have an owner and a structure and a board of directors. And then we can discuss whether or not those people are good enough and suitable to be running our football club. I just want to say one more thing before we leave. I've just had the absolute devastating news come through on my phone that Franz Beckenbauer has sadly passed away at the age of 78. I don't know how, I don't know what's going on. It's literally just flashed up on my phone now, and I can see a couple of people in the comments talking about it. So, yeah, rest in peace to Franz Beckenbauer, of course, unbelievable player, absolutely unbelievable player in his day. And yeah, not an age at all, is it really? 78. So yeah, incredibly sad. As I said, I don't know much of what's gone on. I've just seen it flash up. So incredibly sad. Sending my wishes and thoughts to all of his family and friends, of course. Rest in peace to a football legend, definitely a football legend. Yeah, there you go. There you go. We're going to leave it there. If you have enjoyed this one, please do leave a like. We will be back over the course of the next few weeks or so. A few days or so with more content. So don't forget to look out for that. As I said, if you could subscribe, that would be unbelievable. We're aiming to hit 9,000 subscribers, which would be absolutely amazing. Leave a like if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. If you're watching as a YouTube video, leave your thoughts down below, and we'll get involved with as many of them as we can. Until then, up the toffees. See you later.